Some people apologize for existing. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly. They hesitate before asking for help. They overthink before sharing a problem. They rehearse sentences in their mind, trying to make them smaller, lighter, easier to accept. Because somewhere deep inside, there is a persistent belief. I am too much, too emotional, too needy, too complicated. And if they are not careful, they might become a burden. You may recognize this feeling. The hesitation before texting someone when you're struggling. The guilt after venting, even when you were invited to. The urge to handle everything alone, just to avoid being a problem. It doesn't matter how many times people say, "You're not a burden." The feeling remains. Because this belief is not logical. It is emotional memory. And emotional memory runs deep. People who feel like a burden often live in constant self-monitoring. They often minimize their needs. If they are upset, they tell themselves it's not a big deal. If they are overwhelmed, they say they'll handle it. If they need support, they hesitate. You may notice that they apologize frequently. Sorry for bothering you. Sorry for talking too much. Sorry, I know you're busy. Without realizing it, they assume their presence requires compensation. They try to take up less space. Speak less. Ask for less. Need less. They often become the listener in relationships. The supporter. The stable one. The strong one. They may feel comfortable helping others, but deeply uncomfortable being helped. Receiving feels heavy, like they are adding weight to someone else's life. They often say, "I don't want to stress you out." Even when the other person has willingly offered support. They may struggle to believe that their emotions are welcome. If someone seems distracted while listening, they interpret it as confirmation. I knew I was too much. They are highly sensitive to subtle shifts. Tone, energy, patience levels. If someone sighs while they're talking, it lingers. If someone takes longer to respond, it feels personal. Not because they are dramatic, but because they are scanning for signs that they are becoming inconvenient. They often handle pain privately, crying alone, thinking alone, solving alone, because asking feels risky, and risk feels like rejection. This pattern rarely begins in adulthood. It usually starts in environments where needs felt disruptive. Some children grow up in households where stress was already high. A parent overwhelmed by work. A caregiver struggling emotionally. A family dealing with conflict or instability. In those environments, children become observant. They sense tension. They notice exhaustion. And without anyone saying it directly, they draw a quiet conclusion. My feelings will make this worse. So they adapt. They become easy. They become quiet. They become low maintenance. If they were told phrases like, "Stop being dramatic," or "You're too sensitive," their emotional world begins to shrink. Not because their feelings disappeared, but because expressing them felt unsafe. In some homes, children were praised for independence. "You're so mature. You handle things so well." On the surface, it seems positive. But sometimes, maturity was survival. They learned to self-soothe early, to not cry too loudly, to not ask too often, to not interrupt adult problems. If a child consistently sees their caregiver overwhelmed, they may decide that their own needs are secondary, or worse, burdensome. Even subtle emotional withdrawal can shape this belief. If a parent becomes distant when the child is upset, the child may link emotion with disconnection. Over time, the nervous system associates vulnerability with loss, and so the safest option becomes self-containment. I will carry it alone. The child who once tried not to add stress becomes the adult who tries not to inconvenience anyone. This belief forms quietly. It is rarely announced, but it embeds itself deeply. In adulthood, feeling like a burden affects relationships in subtle ways. They may avoid asking for reassurance, afraid of sounding needy. They may avoid sharing struggles, afraid of overwhelming others. They often overfunction. They solve their own problems quickly, sometimes before anyone notices they were struggling. Not because they are incapable of receiving help, but because receiving help feels costly. In romantic relationships, this pattern can create distance. They may struggle to express hurt. If something bothers them, they downplay it. It's fine. It's not important. Forget it. But inside, feelings accumulate. Unspoken needs become quiet resentments. Yet they still hesitate to voice them, because voicing them feels like adding weight. They may feel guilty for needing reassurance. Even though reassurance is a natural part of intimacy, they may struggle to believe that someone genuinely wants to support them. Support feels conditional, temporary, fragile. At work, they may hesitate to ask questions, even when clarity would help. They don't want to seem incompetent. They don't want to slow others down. So they figure it out alone, sometimes at great cost. They may take on extra tasks without complaint, afraid that saying no makes them difficult. They rarely express burnout openly, because exhaustion feels self-inflicted. Asking for relief feels indulgent. The internal narrative whispers, other people have it worse. Don't make it about you. Handle it quietly. Over time, this leads to emotional isolation, not because others are unwilling to help, but because the door is rarely opened. They may appear strong, resilient, self-sufficient, but resilience built on suppression is heavy. There is also a deep inner conflict. Externally, they may be reliable, dependable, emotionally steady. People may describe them as easy to be around, but internally, they often feel fragile. They crave closeness, yet fear the cost of it. They want to be seen, yet fear being too visible. They long to be supported, yet feel guilty when they are. This contradiction can be exhausting. They may fantasize about finally opening up completely, saying everything they've been holding in. But when the moment arrives, they soften their words, edit their feelings, reduce the intensity, because full honesty feels like excess. They may even feel relief when plans are cancelled, not because they don't care, but because it means they won't risk taking up space. The loneliness of this pattern is subtle. They are often surrounded by people, yet emotionally alone, because connection requires vulnerability, and vulnerability feels dangerous. You might recognize this in yourself. The way you hesitate before calling someone, the way you rehearse your problems in your head, and then decide they're not worth mentioning. The way you feel guilty after someone does something kind for you, as if kindness needs repayment, as if your existence needs justification. But human connection is not a transaction. And yet, for someone who feels like a burden, it often feels exactly that way. A balance sheet. If they receive too much, they must give more. If they struggle too openly, they must compensate. Rest feels undeserved. Comfort feels temporary. Support feels conditional. Over time, this belief erodes self-worth. If your needs are always secondary, you begin to question their legitimacy. If your emotions are always minimized, you begin to doubt their validity. You may become highly attuned to others' feelings, but disconnected from your own. You may excel at empathy, but struggle with self-compassion. The belief, I am a burden, often hides another belief beneath it. My existence is conditional. That love must be earned. Through usefulness. Through stability. Through self-control. But worth is not measured in inconvenience. And yet, this truth can feel distant when the nervous system has learned otherwise. The shift does not begin with forcing yourself to be louder. It does not begin with dramatic declarations. It begins with recognition, with noticing the moments when you shrink automatically, when you apologize unnecessarily, when you carry pain alone, because asking feels wrong. These reactions are not flaws. They are adaptations. At some point in your life, they likely kept you safe. They prevented conflict. They maintained connection. They reduced tension. But what once protected you may now isolate you. Feeling like a burden is rarely about reality. It is about early emotional conditioning. About environments where space felt limited, where needs felt heavy, where attention felt scarce. But adulthood is not childhood. The people in your life now are not the overwhelmed caregivers of the past. And yet the body sometimes reacts, as if they are. Slowly, gently, awareness changes the pattern. Not overnight, not perfectly, but gradually. You begin to notice that expressing emotion does not always lead to withdrawal. That asking for support does not always create distance. That people can choose to stay, even when you are vulnerable. You begin to question the assumption that your needs are excessive. And perhaps the most powerful realization is this: taking up space is not the same as being a burden. Having needs is not the same as being too much. Wanting support is not selfish. It is human. You were never meant to carry everything alone. You were never meant to edit yourself into something smaller. The fear may still appear sometimes. A whisper that says, "Don't say that. Don't ask. Don't inconvenience them." But now you recognize it, not as truth, but as history. And history does not have to dictate the present. You are not a burden for having feelings. You are not heavy for needing support. You are not too much for existing fully. The space you occupy is not excessive. It is simply yours. And perhaps the quiet healing begins, not when you become smaller, but when you allow yourself to remain.